Amazing. All right, so we're going to move on and we're going to continue with the next part of our evening. So we'll get this kind of going. And I want to kind of, what I want to do is this next part of the vision is going to kind of start maybe a little less than a year ago. And so one of the things, before we cue it, Dan, one of the things you need to know is that when I say God speaks to me or God spoke to me, I'm not like making something up. I'm not saying like, hey, this is just like a random feeling and like maybe this is what it means. I mean like with sincerity and with authenticity, that there is a prompting and a move of God working in my heart and manifesting something, a belief, a conviction, a statement, a direction, a sense. And I've learned over the years to be responsive to that, to hone in and understand this is God's voice. There's a great example of this in the book of 1 Samuel, where Samuel the prophet, or who becomes the prophet, or in those days they would call him seers. Samuel is a young boy, and he's kind of placed at an internship at like the age of like 3 with the chief priest. And his family has dedicated him to the Lord, and so he's living with the priest. And, you know, at some point as a young boy, he hears someone calling out to him. He hears a voice calling out to him. So he wakes up and he goes over to the priest, Eli, who's asleep, and wakes him up and says, yeah, you called me. And Eli's like, I didn't call you, like, go back to sleep. So he goes back to his room and hears this voice again. And Eli goes to Eli again. Eli's, that wasn't me. And then it happens a third time, and Eli finally recognizes, no, this is something different. This is God's voice that you're hearing. So next time you hear this voice, respond and say, Lord, here I am. And I think one of the things that we've mischaracterized, or one of the things that we've missed out on, is actually hearing the voice of God, because we've filled our lives with so many other voices. And it's far more convenient and practical to say, well, I don't hear from God because, you know, that takes time and diligence to work and to listen, and a responsive heart with a willingness and an eagerness to receive something. So I share that to say, I'm not trying to I don't use this as a trump card in that way, and I don't use this flippantly either. But about a year ago, March of 2024, so I'll run you through a kind of simple timeline from the spring of last year, and then it kind of culminating into the fall. But March of 2024, one of the things that I sensed and heard the Holy Spirit speaking to me was, Ricky, you guys are headed into a promised land season. That your church is moving into, okay, that's exciting for you, but for me, I was quite skeptical. Because there were no fun promises being obtained for the previous 4 years. And I remember sharing with Krista, and I remember kind of speaking, I was like, it's so difficult for me to embrace this. I know it's God, but it's difficult to believe, because the path and the journey has been so hard, so strenuous, so frustrating, so discouraging, so disappointing. But the language, the explicit language, was promised land, a promised land season. And it would be a season filled with blessing and prosperity. So I decided that I would take the Old Testament journey from Egypt into the promised land, to study through that, to read through that, to meditate on those words, on those passages. And one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was that this promised land was readily available to the Israelites, but there's a very peculiar passage in the book of Exodus where it says they left the promised land equipped for battle, but they were unprepared to battle. They had what they needed other than the desire or the gumption to take hold of this promise. And in April 2024, I was on a flight, I told you, to this little town in Montana. Well, you don't fly there because there's nobody that lives there. So you fly to another town, then drive an hour or something into the middle of nowhere. And literally on this flight, the Holy Spirit spoke to me again and said, Ricky, you need to raise warriors. Your people need to be equipped and prepared to take hold of the promised land. Because like the Old Testament promised land journey, God said, I'm not going to drive out the animals, I'm not going to drive out the enemy, because if I did, the animals would overtake this territory. And so I'm going to empower you, and I'm going to task you to drive out the enemy, to drive out these nations one by one. So you're going to have to fight for this promise. You're going to have to contend for this promise. It's not just something that's going to be given to you because, oh, well, if I sit back and just chill, God's going to deliver it. It's something that's going to take work. And so you need to prepare your people for this. And I shared these things with Krista, shared these things with our leadership team. You jump into May. We've kind of been sitting on this now for a couple of months, talking about this promised land idea, this concept of raising up warriors. And then in May, we had a session where we just sat down as a team and dreamed of what this would look like. What would it entail? How would this work? What does this look like when it comes together? How do we prepare? How do we equip? How do we develop people to take hold of the promise? Because listen, far worse than not having the promise is to step in the land of promise and not be able to reap the fruit and the blessing of the promise. It's like when you're a kid and your family grounds you, get punished for something, and like they're gonna all get dessert and you just have to watch them eat it. That's worse. They just left me at home. And yet so many Christians fall into that same problem where God has made a promise, but they're unwilling to contend for it, unwilling to fight for it, unwilling to drive out the enemy within and the enemy around. And the promise is right there before them. And they miss it. So in May, we started praying, we started preparing, we started planning, we started dreaming, we started working. And we kind of oriented our fall of 2024 to help facilitate this process. We're not experts at making warriors. You know, it's not like that's something that we are, trained in or formalized in. But if you look up the definition of a warrior, it's actually quite simple. It's someone who is both battle ready and battle tested. It doesn't mean they're 100% successful. It doesn't mean that they are the best fighter. It doesn't mean that they're the strongest person. It just means they're ready and they've been prepared. And so in the fall of 2024, we kind of kicked off a few things that would help kind of initiate this, not necessarily achieve it, but facilitate the start of this process of raising up and developing warriors across our church. We started with the Way of Jesus series, which I said back then and we continue to kind of maintain, was that the goal of being a Christian isn't to be a good Christian, but to be an impactful one, to become like Christ. And so helping people understand what it means to actually follow the way of Jesus, because there is indeed a way. And it's not ambiguous, it's not vague. Jesus lived it, modeled it, and taught it. And so we spent the better part of 2 months on Sundays focusing on and learning about the different practices and the different ways that we could become more like Jesus. Because if we're going to become warriors, it starts with our identity and our foundation in Christ. In addition to that, we kicked off our Practicing the Way groups, which all of our groups are following the same format and the same curriculum. Again, learning what it means to become a better follower of Jesus, a more holistic follower of Jesus, a more committed. In fact, one of the things that we did then that we never done in the past is we limited our groups and almost made it somewhat exclusionary and said, hey, if you cannot commit to this, it's okay, it doesn't make you a bad person, but we're looking for people who are willing to commit to the journey, commit to the process, commit to following Jesus in this way, because we're trying to raise up warriors. And you don't become a warrior by cheating the system or cheating the process. You don't become a warrior by saying, casually, maybe. And so we made it somewhere not difficult to be a part of, but we just set the bar of accountability and expectation in a way that we hadn't previously in our church's history. And then the third piece we did was we hosted our first ever Fire Starter retreat for our leaders and volunteers here at Meta Church back in October of 2024, which was epic. It was incredible. We took a weekend away, got out of the city, went into the woods. Some people had never experienced the woods before. Put a bunch of New York City people out in the nature, and they're like, what do we do? What's going on? Stars. Had bonfire, made s'mores. People never made s'mores before. But then we received messages and input that help not just ignite a fire, but catalyze our faith forward. And we spent time learning through the Old Testament King Asa and his life and recognizing, man, there's some pitfalls that come that like this thing of staying close with Jesus, walking with Jesus, following Jesus is not something that you can just kind of let your guard down because inevitably if you do, you'll stumble and slide away. And it was a powerful, powerful weekend. And so we initiated some things. We initiated some ideas and some concepts and some practices that really kind of help, like I said, facilitate and initiate the way of the warrior. What we would say is kind of like the beginning way of a warrior or warrior making at Meta Church. And in 2025, to be honest, we're going to continue that because, again, you don't just make warriors in 3 months. The way of a warrior is a lifestyle. It's a mindset. It's an embodiment. It's something that you embrace for the long run. And in addition to that, what we wanted to do was create ways that people can level up their faith in 2025. You know, when you play a video game as a kid, right, and you beat one level, you get to the next level, and the boss gets bigger. And so when you level up in faith, it's going to require something more of you. It doesn't get easier. You just become stronger and more disciplined, more refined, more savvy, and you know how to navigate those things. And so there's really kind of 4 areas at the moment that I'll kind of share with you. Our Empower events for the women. That was sounding like that was the guys. The Empower event for the women. There we go. That's usually how guys respond. But this year's Focus and Empower is all about identity. All about identity. First event's happening in less than 2 weeks on February 7th. And really there's kind of 3 parts that I would say to the ladies in this room and to those who are a part of our church. Commit to attending, commit to becoming, and commit to transforming. This year, one of the things that we did, and we're not going to lay out the whole calendar for you this year because that might feel a little bit overwhelming, but we literally sat down at the start of January and mapped out our entire calendar year for Empower, for Medico, for ministry things, for Firestarter, all these things. And we mapped that out and said, what are the things that we're going to deliberately do, be intentional about, and prioritize? And we're going to say, this matters most for us in leveling up people's faith and helping create or develop warriors. Let's prioritize those things so that, 1, we don't forget about them. We get to June, you're like, oh man, we should have done this, or we forgot about that. Or 2, you add something else on the calendar because Meta Church, listen, we've always prioritized simplicity, and we're not trying to make it where there's 17 church events in a 7-day week. We have some friends, we know some people, man, they're at church 8 days a week. And we just don't find that to be effective or healthy in the long run or sustainable. So that's never been our mission or our mindset. It's not saying they're doing something wrong, but for us, when I say we, I mean me and Krista and my family in our church. And so we prioritize these things. Our Empower events are all lined up for the year. Similarly, it's not just Empower, but our Medico. And guys, I don't even want to ask you to make noise because I'm going to be disappointed. Medico. We've got some ways to go with our guys. And that's okay because you're here. You're here. And we're going to do it. We're going to move things forward. But the focus this year for Medico is camaraderie. It's about this connection, this community. Because listen, one of the things that I know when I talk to guys, I meet with at least one guy from Meta Church every single week. And I can't tell you the number of times that I hear someone express to me about feeling lonely, feeling like they don't have guy friends, feeling like they don't have meaningful connection. And so that's our focus this year. That's our opportunity this year. And I tease about the guys, but like realistically, we're just kind of a couple years behind the women in our church. Not spiritually speaking, but like stage of like our men's ministry at Meta Church. Does that make sense? So it's not like men are dumb or slow. It's just that like our progression and where we're at in our life stage is 1 to 2 years behind. So these things that we're focusing on this year are things that they focused on 2 years ago. And so Medico, we have our first kind of hangout happening, our first event on Friday, February 27th. But for you, the commitment is a little bit different. The commitment first is to invite. Because I can talk about these things all the time, but the guys need to be inviting the guys. There's personal ownership here. I'm supposed to do these things. You get to do these things. Commit to inviting, commit to engaging, and commit to building. We've got work to do, not just at Meta-Church, but outside Meta-Church. There are men who are losing themselves in their work, losing themselves with other relationships, losing themselves in their career, desperate. You know, for the first time ever, New York Times put out a piece last summer how there is a pivot where young men are leading the charge back to faith. Not the first time ever, but the first time in nearly 4 decades. There's a hunger, and young men are looking for older men, seasoned men. And when I say older, I'm not talking about you got to be way older. I'm talking about like further ahead in your journey to show them the way. And this is the opportunity that we have. But it's not just Empower events. It's not just Medico events. We're talking about through prayer. You know, we have our monthly prayer gatherings. And these are really intended to cultivate a hunger and a desire for prayer at our church. We do these once a month. And what I would encourage, or what I would kind of put out there to all of us, is that this is one of the greatest ways that you can serve our church, is to pray, is to be engaged in prayer, to be committed in prayer. These moments, these nights are so powerful. They're so significant and they're so transformative because there's oftentimes things that we prayed for at these events that we see come to fruition months down the road, sometimes years down the road. But it's not just our monthly gatherings. We have we released, or we kind of are leveraging, I should say, a prayer app, a mobile prayer app, and we're inviting our church to be engaged in this thing. Every week there are weekly prayers, church-wide prayers. Our intercessory team uses this to pray for the prayer requests that come in on a connection card. But every week on this app, we are updating it with church-wide prayers. Every month, there are new church-wide prayers. So we're doing this with a frequency to keep things fresh and say, hey, this is how you can serve our church through prayer. This is how you can build up our church through prayer. And what's great about a prayer app is that, 1, it's automatically there. 2, you can do this on your own time. It doesn't matter if my work keeps me away from a prayer night once a month. I can wake up early and use this app. I can do this on my lunch break. I can do this on my commute away from the church or away from work or wherever it is that I'm going. And so this prayer app is a means, again, the gathering is about cultivating hunger, and the app is about building a culture of prayer so that we become known as a house of prayer. And then this last piece, Firestarter 2025. We've got our date set. Our deposit has been paid. Friday, October 10th through Saturday, October 11th. And this is explicitly for people who serve, lead, and contribute at Meta-Church, contributing to our culture, contributing to making a difference. Because this is an opportunity for us as a church to invest in those folks. We've got room for about 48 people, I think it is. Is that what I have up there? Yep. 48 people. Spots will be allocated on a first come, first served basis. We had 95 people here today. I don't know what we'll have in October, but it seems like it'll be more than 48. We have somewhere close to 70 people who serve frequently or consistently and contribute in some way at Meta-Church. So we have more people who meet the criteria than we have spaces available. So when we make registration open, you want to jump in. Because September will come like, oh, is there space? Like, next year. But again, this is an opportunity. And it's funny because I was thinking about something. There's a sermon or a series of sermons that I know I'm supposed to preach this year. But it dawned on me, it's like, maybe this is what I'm supposed to preach for Firestarter this year. And then it got me excited thinking about this because the audience and the people like that would be there. It's like, oh wait, they could do something with this. And I don't know for sure that that's what I'm supposed to preach then, or that's what the direction we're supposed to run then. But already I'm excited and thinking about, God, what are you going to do through this event this year? Where are you going to lead us? So these are ways that you can level up your faith in 2025, but there's also one more way. It's something that we've never done before. It's something that we've never attempted before, but it's going to be brand new to our church this year. Something that really is about kind of taking it up a notch and helping you get to the next level. And it's something that we are labeling or calling Meta Academy. Okay. Let me give you a little bit more about this. Meta Academy is all about leveling up your faith and launching into mission. You see, one of the things that happens in a church as a church grows is that I've shared this before, but you grow and you become insulated. You grow and you kind of get a little bit of let's call it fat. And you just kind of get like a little comfortable. But the church was never supposed to be like a hoarding pen for people. It was supposed to mobilize people out into the world, into mission, to engage in the work of Jesus and his kingdom around us and beyond us. And so this academy is all about initiating that in people and helping you level up your faith so that you can launch into mission. I love the words that are spoken about King David before he became king. It says David is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. And really, when it comes to our academy, the vision is to create this in people at our church, people who are skilled in speech, people who are honorable and live with valor, people who are ready for the battle, people who are skillful in whatever it is that God has assigned to them or delegated to them, people who stand and others say he's respectable, she's presentable, they have good presence, and people who are clearly and distinguishably marked by the presence of the Lord. And so Meta Academy is something that we are initiating, something that we are launching, which is, functionally speaking, will be kind of like a night school of sorts. And I'll share a little more need to knows because I know there's some people who are like, well, what's going to happen? So I'll kind of break it down in 3 parts for you. From a vision standpoint, we want to intentionally raise new leaders and help launch them into impactful mission. Doesn't mean that everyone who goes through this is going to be a pastor. That's not the goal. Doesn't mean that everyone who goes through this is going to plant a church somewhere someday. That's not the goal. The goal is to raise up people who are committed to living their lives on mission in alignment with Jesus. The goal is that you walk away knowing what it looks like to orient your life around God's kingdom and his church. And I don't need to get into this down at this moment, but here's what you need to know. The greatest thing you could do, the greatest thing you could discover is the essence of God's kingdom and to live your life in pursuit of it. To live your life expanding it. Jesus spoke about this so often, so frequently, so powerfully. From a logistics standpoint, there's going to be 16 extended sessions. We don't have kind of the timeline set yet, but you can expect somewhere close to like 3 hours, and it's going to be over the course of 8 months, 2 sessions, a weeknight evening per month. And year 1, because we want to do this kind of in a more intimate and more manageable way, is going to be limited to just 12 people. Because we don't want to just have a bunch of people and then not effectively press into the things that God is calling us to press into. As far as when and what that entails, here's what you need to know. It's going to launch in September of 2025. We've got time. That gives us time to prepare. Some time to kind of plan ahead for this. There'll be an early registration. There'll be a wait list, the wait list will begin tonight. But when we're ready to accept or to open up registration, there'll be an application period where people will apply. And it's not like this intense process, but it's an intentional one. One in which we say, okay, why does this matter to someone? Are they just free and have, a night where like, I could go to that? Or is it actually because they're desiring to be useful and used by God in meaningful ways? So this will begin. We'll open this registration later this spring, and then we'll launch in September. There'll be a fee associated with this, again, to kind of help support renting a space and facilitating like all of this. And again, those details will come down the road. But this is something that is really, again, intended to be a very deliberate way of raising up warriors. People who say, I'm going to live on purpose, live with intention, orient my life around the things of God, and help facilitate and help initiate it in the lives of others. So here's what I want to do. I've covered a lot of ground, so I want to give you some practical next steps. You'll see these come up. We have some next steps cards that Krista and the group will pass out. You can just take one of these. These you will also turn back in to us, and we'll send you more details. But I've kind of broken down these next steps into 3 areas: growing, serving, and planning. Okay, growing next steps. Okay, we have our partnership class happening next Sunday, February 2nd. This is Vision Night is about where we're headed. Partnership class is about who we are. If you're newer to Meta Church, you've never attended a partnership class, let me encourage you, come to partnership class. It literally will reveal and disclose everything that matters to us. We'll give you insight into how we approach the things that we do here at Meta Church. So if you're interested, if you've not attended and you want to come or attend next week, let us know on that next steps card. Additional growing next steps are the Empower event and the Medico events. Again, if you want to know about those things, if you want to have information or receive information about those things, mark that on the card. When it comes to serving next steps, okay, maybe you're not on a volunteer team. Maybe you want to be a part of a volunteer team. There's a multitude of areas and ways that you can be involved in serving and contributing at Meta Church and in our community. Again, if you mark that, we'll just kind of share the various different teams where you can contribute and serve and be a part of. Maybe you want to be a part of serving our church through prayer and you want a link or details for the prayer app. Mark that on the card. Again, we'll make sure to get you everything that you need as it pertains to that, where you can download the app via the Play Store or the App Store on iPhone. When it comes to planning next steps, again, just kind of putting some things out there so that you can kind of plan ahead. We have the evangelism, the D-Pro workshop happening later this year, probably May or June. Again, we'll kind of, it's TBD at the moment, but we'll communicate that when it's ready. Again, Academy launching in September. You're like, hey, put me on that wait list. I want to know about it. I want to be one of the first to find out about it. Mark that on the card. And then lastly, the Firestarter retreat. You're like, hey, there's 48 spots. I'm going to be one of the 48, so give me the details. And when that becomes ready or available, I will jump on it and be one of the first to sign up. These 3 areas, listen, you may want to commit to everything. Amazing. You don't have to. What we're looking for and the vision that we're casting is ways that, again, you can level up your faith, ways that you can move to the next level in your relationship with God, ways that you can move to the next level in your expression and walk with Jesus. And so find the areas that matter to you, leverage the areas that you think, hey, this applies to me or this is pertinent to me, and then hang on to that card. I guess if you finish it, write your name on it, make sure your name's on there and that somebody can read it besides you, because Lily's going to be looking at this and like, what is this? Take a moment to do that, and then what we're going to do to wrap up the night, we're going to go back into a time of worship. So I'll give us maybe just a couple minutes. And here's what I'll say. Again, it's really easy to just check something. But if you know me, you know that's never been my heart. It's never been my desire. That's not like my goal. Tonight isn't successful if everyone marks a bunch of stuff. Tonight is successful if a handful, decide that they're going to live different than they've ever lived before. Now, my hope and my prayer is that all of you choose that. But if even a few did it, then tonight would be successful. So as I give you this moment, what I want to encourage you, what I invite you is to prayerfully say, God, what are the things that I'm going to commit to? What are the things that I'm going to be invested in? What are the ways that you want to help me become the person you've called me to be?